I wanted to pick up on something you were saying about how the impacts of climate change are being felt right now. Islands are already disappearing. A lot of the narrative we're hearing about climate change is that it's something that's going to happen in the future. How do we change that?
Yes, so I mean that narrative is incorrect. It's incorrect in Australia in relation to the mainland, incorrect in relation to the Torres Strait, and incorrect in relation to the rest of the world. So, for example, the Torres Strait 8, when they presented their lawsuit to the United Nations, the Australian federal government responded saying, oh, climate change is a future concern. And I spoke about this publicly and I said, it's not a future concern, it's a present concern, it's a past concern. This has been a concern for about 30, 40 years, seriously. And before that, it was just something that's coming. But mainland Australia is already feeling the effects of climate change. We've got bushfires, we've got increased flooding and dams bursting, and so that's where the issues are. But they don't seem to understand that it's already affecting the country and they really need to take some action before Australia gets too hot to live in or infrastructure and communities are destroyed.
Can you tell us what are some fundamental basic human rights that you are calling for, especially when it comes to First Nations climate justice?
So there are a lot of human rights that come from the Declaration. We also have Indigenous human rights within the United Nations. But really we're talking about right to culture, right to clean, healthy water, right to sanitation, right to housing, right to practice religious and spiritual beliefs, right to stay on our ancestral homelands, and really just the right to survive as a population. So all of those rights are being breached at the moment by the Australian federal government in the Torres Strait. And they're being breached all over the world. I was in New York last year working on a project around Ecuador and what's happening for their Indigenous population. So it's the same kind of things. And they have fundamental rights that anyone in Australia would want to have. If we're on the mainland and we're in Sydney, you have a right to want a home and to stay in that home. You want a right to medical services and health services and education. You want a right to clean water and fresh nutritional food. You want a right to feel safe in your environment. You want a right to live where you want to live. Those are the exact same rights the Indigenous people want, the Torres Strait Islanders want, but for some reason it doesn't translate from those human rights into a Western paradigm and a Western legal system.
Another really compelling legal area that you're engaged in rights is in rights of nature. Can you walk us through what that means?
So rights of nature is a very new legal concept where you apply human rights to the environment. So whether it be tree, rainforest, lake, river, and animals already have their own rights. So we're stretching the jurisprudence, I guess, in relation to how we can have legal standing and have the environment have a legal entity. So there's been success with the Whanganui River in New Zealand, now is recognized as having legal entity. The Ganges River is considered as being protected because it has human rights. And Ecuador in 2008, I believe, was the first country to put it in the constitution that their nature does have legal standing. What that means broadly is that instead of suing a company as an individual or as an Indigenous population, we can have lawyers represent environmental institutes like rainforests and trees and rivers, etc., against the company.
You stated in the past that Australia needs to take the lead from First Nations voices. Why is that, and why do you think that, and what do you think would allow that change or would make that change?
You need to listen to Indigenous voices because not only is there a whole knowledge system and base that they're missing out on, Indigenous people are survivors by nature. So you're going to learn tips in relation to resilience and adaptation that potentially you wouldn't think about because it's a cultural norm for Indigenous people to have that. And so if you bring in Indigenous people into your organization or your company or your law firm, or within politics, they're going to bring a different way of thinking. They're going to bring their different beliefs and values, but those values and beliefs are all centered around community, helping community, preserving community, helping the environment, preserving the environment. And that's, why we talk about our ancestors so much. I'm here today because my ancestors were strong enough to survive everything they went through, including blackbirding and slavery. Whatever they've brought down to me and whatever I do for the next generation is what will continue the survival of Indigenous people. So there is that strength within the Indigenous population and within individuals that I think should be valued and should be brought into the mainstream.